From the outside, our house looked like every other on the street. Fresh paint, trimmed hedges, the faint glow of warm lights spilling onto the lawn. Neighbors often told me they admired our marriage. "You and Richard are perfect," they'd say, their smiles tinged with envy. I always smiled back, but inside I knew perfection was a mask. Richard was charming in public. He opened doors for me, praised my cooking at dinner parties, and held my hand just long enough for others to notice. He carried himself like a man in control of every detail, his tie perfectly knotted, his schedule precise to the minute. But control came with silence. At home, the laughter stopped. Conversations became instructions: which wine to buy, how the curtains should fall, how I was spending too much on groceries. They were small things, almost trivial, yet each one pressed down on me piece by piece, until I felt less like a partner and more like an actor in a play he was directing. At night, I studied his face in the dim light. Strong jaw, calm expression, nothing outwardly cruel, and yet a distance lingered between us, as though a wall had been quietly erected. When I asked if something was wrong, he would smile without meeting my eyes and say, "Don't overthink, Claire. We're fine." But fine felt like a verdict, not reassurance. The cracks showed in subtler ways, too. He hated when I moved things without asking. His books, his tools, even the framed photo on the mantel. If I adjusted it slightly, he would return it to its exact spot, his jaw tight, his eyes sharp. Sometimes when we hosted friends, I'd catch him watching me. The smile on his face didn't reach his eyes. It was a reminder that even when the room was full, I belonged to him alone. I told myself every marriage had its flaws, that Richard's habits were quirks, not warnings. But deep down a heaviness lingered, an unease I couldn't shake. One evening as I locked up the house, I glanced at our reflection in the window, his arm draped around me, my smile polite but strained. For the first time I wondered if the life we'd built was truly ours, or if it was his and I was simply living in it. That thought kept me awake long after Richard's steady breathing filled the room. And it was then, in the silence, that I first sensed it. Something hidden, something waiting. Soon the late nights would begin, and with them, the whispers in the dark. The whispers began as small things, sounds in the house at hours when no one should be awake. I woke one night to the faint murmur of Richard's voice drifting from his study. His tone was low, clipped, urgent, so different from the warm, steady cadence he used in public. I sat up, straining to catch the words, but they were swallowed by the closed door. When his footsteps approached, I slipped back beneath the covers, heart racing. He entered quietly, the glow of his phone screen briefly lighting his face before he slid it onto the nightstand. His breathing was calm, measured. He kissed my forehead and lay beside me as if nothing had happened. The next morning over breakfast, I asked, "Who called so late?" "Client in Hong Kong," he said smoothly, not even looking up from his newspaper. "Time zones don't care about my sleep schedule." I nodded, forcing a smile, but the explanation didn't settle. His answers always seemed too quick, too polished, as though rehearsed. Over the next weeks, the odd behavior multiplied. Sometimes he stayed out long after work, claiming business dinners that left no trace of receipts. Other nights, he lingered in the car outside, his silhouette lit faintly by the glow of his phone. If I walked toward the driveway, the conversation would end abruptly, and he'd enter the house with that same composed smile. I tried not to doubt him. I reminded myself of his charm, his precision, the way he always provided for us. But unease curled tighter around me with each unanswered question. Finally, one evening I asked outright, "You've been different lately. Calls at night, long absences. Richard, what's going on?" He set down his fork slowly, studying me with unnerving calm. "Claire, you're imagining things again. I'm not imagining them. I've seen you." His laugh cut me off, sharp and dismissive. "You've always been anxious, love. You overthink everything. There's nothing wrong here, except maybe your nerves." The words stung. My protests dissolved under the weight of his certainty. Gaslight flickered in his smile, and I hated how easily it worked. That night, as he slept peacefully, I lay awake replaying every moment. Maybe he was right. Maybe I was inventing shadows where there were none. But the gnawing doubt refused to leave. One night I crept toward the study again. Through the door I heard him clearly. "Not yet. She doesn't know." My blood ran cold. I stumbled back into the darkness, pressing a hand over my mouth. She doesn't know. Who was she? And what secret was he protecting so carefully? When dawn crept through the curtains, I sat at the kitchen table with a coffee I couldn't drink. Staring at Richard's empty chair, something was out there, someone. And soon, I would find her shadow in our lives. The first time I found it, I thought it was a mistake. I had gone into Richard's car to grab my scarf before he left for work. The leather seat smelled faintly of perfume, floral, sharp, distinctly not mine. As I reached for my scarf, my hand brushed against something small, wedged between the seat and the console. A bracelet. Thin silver, delicate, with a charm shaped like a crescent moon. I held it in my palm, my stomach dropping. It wasn't mine. I hadn't worn jewelry like this since college. I stared at it for too long, frozen, until Richard's footsteps crunched on the driveway gravel. I shoved it into my coat pocket before he reached the car. That evening, when he came home, the perfume was still there on his shirt collar. Not mine. Never mine. The evidence sat heavy in my coat pocket for 2 days. Finally, I pulled it out at dinner, placing it carefully between us on the table. Whose is this? My voice was steady, but my hands trembled. Richard froze, fork suspended midair. His eyes flicked from the bracelet to me. For a second, his mask slipped. Where did you get that? He demanded. In your car. Richard, just tell me the truth. His face twisted, red creeping up his neck. You been snooping through my things? This is what you've been obsessing over? It was right there in plain sight. And the perfume, enough! He slammed his palm against the table, rattling the dishes. Do you hear yourself? You sound insane, paranoid. Do you really think I'd be so careless? That I'd leave something like that lying around if I were cheating? The force of his anger stunned me into silence. He leaned across the table, voice low and dangerous. Stop inventing problems, Claire. You're going to drive me away if you keep this up. Tears blurred my vision, but I blinked them back. I just want the truth. His eyes narrowed. The truth is you don't trust me. And if you don't fix that, then maybe you're the problem. The room went silent except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. I stared at the bracelet between us. That simple piece of jewelry, now poisoned with meaning. Later, when he kissed me goodnight, his lips lingered a little too long, as if sealing my silence. I lay stiff in his arms, every nerve alive with unease. The bracelet sat hidden in my nightstand drawer. Proof, a seed of rot beneath the surface of our marriage. I told myself maybe I was wrong. Maybe I had misread everything. But deep inside I knew Richard wasn't just keeping secrets. He was burying something far darker, and soon I would begin to dig. The bracelet stayed hidden in my nightstand, but the weight of it pressed on me every day. I couldn't stop thinking about the look on Richard's face, the flicker of recognition before his anger swallowed it whole. And that was when the flashbacks began. Not mine, but his. Years earlier, Richard had been a different man. Younger, reckless, living in a small town where he thought charm could erase every mistake. But charm only went so far the night he cornered a man outside a bar, fists clenched, rage boiling. You think you can ruin me? He had spat, his voice thick with alcohol and fury. The man barely had time to answer before Richard struck him. One blow, then another, until the man's body crumpled beneath the streetlight, blood pooling on the asphalt. Richard stood over him, chest heaving, a sick satisfaction in his eyes, followed quickly by fear. He left the scene, telling himself it was a fight gone too far, not murder. He buried it with silence and distance, never looking back. But shadows don't stay buried. Back in the present, I didn't know that story in full, not yet, but I felt its residue in everything he did. The tension in his jaw, the way he recoiled whenever someone mentioned the past. Something was festering beneath the life we had built, and I needed to uncover it. So I began my own quiet rebellion. I bought a small leather-bound notebook and hid it inside the lining of my purse. Each night when Richard was asleep, I filled it with details. The bracelet, the perfume, the late-night calls, the way his voice sharpened when I asked questions. I wrote everything down as though cataloging evidence in a case no one else believed existed. It became a lifeline, proof that I wasn't losing my mind, but keeping it felt dangerous. One wrong move, one wrong discovery, and Richard would know I was documenting him. Still, the alternative, silence, terrified me more. One evening, as he sat across from me reading the paper, I studied him in the fading light. His face looked calm, almost gentle. To anyone else, he would seem like the perfect husband. Yet I knew now that calmness was an act, a mask hiding a history he would kill to keep secret. I closed my notebook with shaking hands, whispering to myself, I will find the truth. But the truth was not just about where he went at night or who he saw. It was about what he had already done. And the more I uncovered, the more dangerous it would become. The journal gave me courage. It made the invisible visible, turned whispers and shadows into something I could hold in my hands. But courage has its price, because once you start looking, you can't stop. Richard guarded his study like a fortress, always locking it before bed, carrying his laptop everywhere. But one night he left in a rush for an urgent meeting, forgetting to close the screen. The glow called to me. I sat down, heart pounding as I navigated the files. It didn't take long. Bank statements, spreadsheets, transactions, money moving in and out of accounts I had never heard of, large withdrawals, transfers to names I didn't recognize, thousands disappearing without explanation. My pulse hammered. The dates aligned perfectly with the late-night calls and unexplained absences. This wasn't business. This was something darker. When Richard returned, I couldn't hide it. I confronted him in the kitchen, the printouts clutched in my shaking hands. What is this, Richard? Who are you sending money to? His eyes snapped to the papers, then to me. For a heartbeat, the mask cracked. He stepped forward, towering over me, voice low and dangerous. You went through my files. I had to. You're lying to me, hiding things. Look at these transfers. Don't you dare tell me this is normal. The silence stretched thin. Then, in a sudden burst, he grabbed the papers and slammed them onto the counter. You don't understand. These are business expenses. Business expenses. My voice shook. At 2 a.m? To strangers? That was when it happened. He shoved me. Hard. My back hit the edge of the counter, pain shooting up my spine. I gasped, staring at him in disbelief. His chest rose and fell, his face flushed with rage. The room went deathly still. His eyes flickered, realization dawning. Slowly, his shoulders sagged. Claire. His voice broke, trembling. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. Tears welled in his eyes. He dropped to his knees, hands clutching mine, desperation etched into every line of his face. You know I love you. I'm under pressure, too much pressure. I lost control. I stood frozen, my ribs aching, my mind torn between fear and pity. His tears fell hot against my skin. The same man who had just shoved me was now sobbing, begging forgiveness like a child. I can't lose you, he whispered. Please, Claire. Don't give up on me. I wanted to scream, to run, but I nodded instead. Not because I forgave him, because I was trapped. His sorrow was just another chain, binding me tighter to him. That night, as he held me close, whispering apologies, I stared at the ceiling in silence. The bruise on my side throbbed with every breath, proof of the line we had crossed. And the next day, when I found bloodstains in the kitchen, I knew those chains were dragging me somewhere far darker. The bruise from Richard's shove hadn't faded when I came home late one evening, arms full of groceries. At first I noticed the faint metallic smell. Then I saw it. Dark stains smeared across the kitchen floor, streaked as though something heavy had been dragged. The bag slipped from my hands, apples rolling across the tiles. My throat closed. Richard? He emerged from the hallway a moment later, a dish towel wrapped tightly around his hand, a forced smile. Relax, Claire. I cut myself chopping vegetables. It's nothing. I stared at the towel. The blood seeping through was fresh, but the knives on the counter were spotless, already washed and drying. Too clean. Too quick. That much blood? My voice shook. From a kitchen cut? His smile hardened. You're overreacting again. Always making drama. Gaslight, smooth and practiced. He kissed my forehead before tossing the towel into the sink. I'll clean up the rest. Go sit down. But later, when he disappeared upstairs, I crouched low and traced the stains with trembling fingers. The patterns weren't drops, they were smears. Dragged, deliberate. My stomach knotted. That night, lying stiff beside him in bed, I began a new routine. If I couldn't stop the lies, I could at least preserve the truth. The journal became my lifeline. Every detail went in: the bracelet, the transfers, the shove, and now the blood. I wrote quickly, quietly, each entry a record of the man I was beginning to fear more than I loved. But documenting him changed me. I started watching with sharper eyes, memorizing the way he lingered too long by the garage, how his phone never left his pocket, how his smiles grew strained when I stayed in the room too long. I even noted the silences, the stretches of time where I couldn't account for his whereabouts, the hours that seemed to vanish without explanation. At dinner with friends, when Richard laughed and played the role of devoted husband, I smiled too, but inside I was counting every inconsistency, every flicker in his expression. The more I wrote, the clearer the picture became. The man across from me wasn't just hiding something, he was protecting it. One evening as I locked the journal away, I whispered to myself, "This will be my proof. If something happens, they'll know the truth." But proof meant little if I couldn't understand the whole story. And to find that story, I would have to look beyond Richard, at the shadow of another woman who was already too close. Her name surfaced by accident. Richard left his phone charging on the counter while he stepped outside to take a call. A message appeared, glowing in the dark. "Rachel, we need to meet. Tonight." My chest tightened, the letters burning into my mind before the screen went black. Rachel. That night he told me he was working late. I smiled, nodded, even kissed his cheek as though I believed him. But as soon as he left, I followed. I trailed his car through winding streets, headlights carving shadows across the pavement. He parked outside a quiet cafe on the edge of town. Through the window I saw her, dark hair swept back, sharp eyes that carried both confidence and bitterness. She leaned toward Richard, her expression tense, hands gripping a small envelope. I watched from my car, pulse pounding. Their meeting wasn't intimate. There were no lingering touches, no flirtatious smiles. It was business, or rather something darker. Richard's face was tight, defensive. He snatched the envelope quickly, glancing around as if hunted. When she left, I stayed. My instincts screamed that this woman wasn't just a lover. She was something more dangerous. I followed her. She walked briskly through the rain-slick streets, shoulders squared, eyes darting over her shoulder once as if she felt me. Eventually, she disappeared into a narrow apartment building with peeling paint and dim lights flickering in the stairwell. I lingered outside, heart racing. The building looked forgotten, the kind of place where secrets lived. Back home, I searched her name online. Rachel Myers. And there it was. News clippings from years ago in the same small town where Richard had grown up. A fight, a man beaten nearly to death in an alley. And Rachel mentioned not as a victim but as a witness. She had been there. She had seen Richard at his worst. The realization left me trembling. She wasn't haunting him out of love. She was haunting him with knowledge. In my journal, I wrote her name in bold letters, Rachel Myers. The key, over the next week I kept watching. Sometimes Richard left late at night and didn't come back until dawn. Other times I saw Rachel's silhouette in the distance, pacing outside the cafe, her expression filled with something like fear. One evening, I dared to walk past her building. Through a crack in the curtains, I saw her on the phone, gesturing wildly, her face pale. I couldn't hear the words, but the fear in her eyes told me everything. She wasn't holding a secret. She was holding a weapon. Rachel knew what Richard had done all those years ago. And now she was using it. I walked home in the cold, the weight of the truth pressing down on me. If Rachel was the key to Richard's secrets, then finding out exactly what she knew would either save me or destroy me. I found him in the study, the curtains drawn, his shoulders hunched over a glass of whiskey. The air was thick with the smell of smoke and tension. For once, Richard didn't wear his usual mask of composure. His hands trembled as he lifted the glass, eyes distant. "You've been watching me," he said without turning around. His voice was quiet, but the edge beneath it sliced through me. My breath caught. "Because you've been lying to me." He finally faced me. His expression was tired, almost broken. "You want the truth? Fine, you'll have it." He sank into the armchair, running a hand down his face. "Years ago, before you, I got into trouble. I was young, reckless. There was a fight. A man tried to ruin me, and I defended myself. It went too far. He didn't get back up. My stomach knotted. You killed him? Richard's eyes glistened, but the tears felt deliberate, controlled. It wasn't murder. It was survival. I had no choice. But people like Rachel, they twist the story. They make me into a monster because it benefits them. Rachel. The name hit like a slap. He didn't deny her existence, he weaponized it. She's been blackmailing me for years, he continued, voice rising with righteous anger, always threatening to expose me. That's why the money, the meetings, not because I wanted it, Claire, but because I had to protect us. Protect us. The words lodged in my throat. He was painting himself as the victim, the savior, while my memories screamed otherwise, the shove, the blood on the kitchen tiles, the bracelet that wasn't mine. Why didn't you tell me? My voice cracked, his gaze hardened. Because I knew you'd react like this. You'd doubt me. You'd think the worst. That's what you do. You imagine shadows and call them truth. He stood, looming over me, and though his tears still glistened, his presence felt suffocating. You don't understand how dangerous Rachel is. How dangerous it all is. If you talk to anyone, your sister, the police, even a friend, you're not just risking me. You're risking yourself. My breath quickened. Are you threatening me? His smile was cold, deliberate. I'm warning you. There's a difference. The room seemed smaller, the walls pressing in. I realized then that every gesture of sorrow, every tear shed, was another string in the web he wove around me. A web of control dressed as confession. That night he slid into bed beside me, whispering apologies, promises, assurances that we were stronger together. I lay stiff, eyes open, staring into the dark because the truth wasn't that he had confessed. The truth was that he had tightened the cage, and the next sound of freedom wouldn't come from him. It would come from the knock of someone else at our door. The first knock was firm, measured, the kind of sound that doesn't ask. It demands. Richard wasn't home. He'd left hours earlier, muttering about business he had to clean up. I stood frozen in the living room, palms damp, heart racing. When the knock came again, I forced myself to the door. A man stood there. Mid-40s, sharp eyes, coat collar turned against the wind. He flipped open a badge. Detective Morgan. May I come in? I hesitated, then stepped aside. He walked in slowly, scanning the house with a gaze that missed nothing. His presence filled the room like a weight pressing against my chest. Mrs. Whitmore, he began, voice steady. I'm investigating the disappearance of Rachel Myers. We have reason to believe your husband knew her. Her name rang in my ears. Rachel, the woman with the sharp eyes. The envelope. The late-night meetings, my throat caught. I don't know her well. The detective's gaze lingered on me. Neighbors saw Richard meeting her recently. Several times? She hasn't been seen in over a week. Do you know where he's been going? The air seemed to thicken around me. I thought of Richard's warnings, the way his hand had gripped my shoulder when he said, Don't trust anyone. Don't drag others into this. My ribs still ached from the shove. My mind replayed the bruises, the blood, the gaslighting. I could tell Morgan everything. I could beg for help, but I knew the cost. If Richard found out I'd spoken, his anger wouldn't stop at words. I'm sorry, I whispered, eyes dropping to the floor. I can't help you. Morgan studied me in silence, his expression unreadable. Finally, he pulled a card from his pocket and set it gently on the coffee table. If you remember anything at all, call me. Day or night. His tone was calm, but beneath it I sensed urgency. He knew I was hiding something. When the door closed behind him, I stood alone in the silence, staring at the card. The weight of it burned in my palm when I picked it up, a lifeline I didn't dare grab. By the time Richard came home, the house was spotless, dinner simmering on the stove, my smile carefully painted back in place. But inside I was shaking, because the detective wasn't going away and neither was the truth. After Detective Morgan's visit, Richard's paranoia grew like a shadow stretching across every room. He checked my phone when I wasn't looking, asked where I'd been if I took too long at the market, studied me as though every blink carried a secret. At night, he paced the hallway instead of sleeping, muttering under his breath. One evening, as I stirred dinner, he slammed the fridge shut behind me. The sound rattled the glasses in the cabinets. Did you talk to him? His voice was low, tight. Who? I asked, my hands trembling over the spoon. The detective. Don't play dumb, Claire. His eyes burned into me. I swallowed hard. I didn't say anything. He stepped closer, his breath hot against my cheek. You're lying. I can see it. You've always been a terrible liar. I turned to face him, desperate for calm. Richard, please. But the storm had already broken. He shoved the pot off the stove, sauce splattering across the tiles. His hand gripped my arm so tightly I cried out. You think you can betray me? He roared. After everything I've done to protect us? Fear surged through me, but so did something else, anger. Months of silence, gaslighting, bruises, and secrets burned into my veins. I yanked free, stumbling toward the counter. My hand closed around the first thing I found. A heavy ceramic bowl. Stay back, I warned, my voice shaking but louder than it had ever been. Richard laughed bitterly, advancing. You won't do it. You need me. He lunged, and instinct took over. I swung the bowl. It shattered against his shoulder, shards flying. He staggered, then grabbed for me again, rage distorting his features. My hand shot to the counter, finding a jagged shard of porcelain from the broken dish. As he came at me, I drove it forward. The sound was wet, sharp, final. His eyes widened, disbelief flooding them as he clutched his chest. Blood spread quickly across his shirt, dark and glistening. He staggered back, collapsing onto the kitchen floor with a sickening thud. The house fell silent. My breaths came ragged, the shard slipping from my trembling hand. I stared at the spreading pool of crimson, at the man who had once been my husband, my captor, my cage. For the first time in months, the silence wasn't his weapon, it was mine. But freedom didn't feel like victory. It felt like standing on the edge of something even darker, because soon, the world would want answers. The sirens came quickly. I remember the blur of flashing lights through the kitchen window. The officers' boots squeaking against blood-slicked tiles. Hands guided me outside, their voices calm but firm, as if I were fragile glass about to shatter. Richard's body remained inside, a silent monument to everything that had brought us here. At the station, under the white glare of the interrogation lamp, I told my story in pieces. The bracelet, the secret transfers, the shove that left bruises, the bloodstains I was told to ignore, and finally, Rachel. Her name cracked the silence. Detective Morgan leaned forward, eyes steady. You knew about her? I followed them, I admitted, my voice trembling. She wasn't his lover. She was leverage. She knew what he'd done years ago. The investigation unfolded like peeling wallpaper, layer after layer of Richard's life revealed. The violent assault in his past, the years of hush money, Rachel's body found by the river, her death tied to the man I thought I knew. He hadn't just hidden secrets, he had buried them one by one. The courtroom was another kind of cage. Rows of strangers stared as lawyers dissected my marriage, my choices, my silence. Some painted me as a victim. Others hinted I had waited too long to fight back. Every word carved deeper into me as though survival itself required justification. When the verdict came, it was clear. Self-defense. I would not go to prison, but freedom felt hollow. The public wanted a headline. The wife who killed her husband. Neighbors whispered when I passed, their sympathy edged with curiosity. Friends who once envied us avoided my calls. Reporters waited outside the courthouse, cameras flashing, questions slicing through the air. At night, the house was unbearable. Every creak reminded me of his footsteps. Every shadow carried his presence. The blood was gone, but the silence was louder than ever. I had survived Richard. I had exposed his crimes. Justice was served, at least on paper, but the cost was everything. My home, my peace, the illusion of a life that had never truly been mine. And as the world moved on, I was left alone to wonder, was I free or simply trapped in a different kind of prison? The screen fades in on a quiet suburban street. The Whitmore house stands at the corner, its shutters drawn, lawn overgrown. What was once described by neighbors as the picture of stability now looks hollow. Stripped of its perfection, a narrator's voice begins. Richard and Claire Whitmore appeared to have it all: respect, wealth, a beautiful home. But beneath the surface, their marriage was rotting. Lies, manipulation, and violence built a cage that ended in bloodshed. Photographs appear on the screen. Richard at a company party grinning. Claire in a summer dress, smile tight around the edges. Then crime scene images, the kitchen tiles stained with red, shards of broken porcelain scattered like remnants of war. The narrator continues. Richard's violent past had been carefully hidden until Rachel Myers, a woman tied to his secrets, stepped back into his life. When Rachel disappeared, the threads unraveled, pulling Claire into a nightmare she could no longer escape. Clips roll of courtroom sketches, reporters' flashes, and Claire on the witness stand. Her face is pale but steady, her hands folded tightly as lawyers argue around her. Claire's testimony revealed years of gaslighting, intimidation, and emotional abuse. What many saw as a perfect marriage was, in truth, a slow descent into control and fear. When Richard's paranoia reached its breaking point, Claire fought back and survived. The screen cuts to an interview clip. Claire, months later, seated in a plain room. Her eyes are tired, her voice calm but heavy. "They told me I was free," she says softly. "The courts, the police, the papers, they all called me a survivor. But freedom doesn't feel like this. Freedom should mean peace, and I don't have that. I still hear him sometimes in the quiet. I still feel him watching." The image fades to Claire walking alone along a desolate shoreline, the horizon gray, waves crashing against the rocks. She is a silhouette against the vastness, her figure small, her pace slow. The narrator speaks one final time. In the end, justice exposed Richard Whitmore's crimes, but it came at the cost of everything Claire once knew. Was she freed from her husband, or sentenced to a different kind of prison? That answer lies not in the courts, but in the silence she carries with her. The screen fades to black. White text appears, based on a chilling true crime documentary.